What's up? What's up? What's up? It is September 27th, 7:34. Cheers. I'm having a beer. I had a really good day. I journaled earlier, so I did a lot of errands and stuff. I had my counseling appointment, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about it before, or while it's still fresh in my memory. So it's kind of what I expected. Old man, religious and a bit sexist and a bit racist, but he's free and he had some good stuff to say as well. So I take it with a grain of salt, but I also call him out on it. So like some examples are there were a few times he called me a good girl. There were 2 times that he said, "You women," which I thought was pretty amusing. There was one point where he asked me, he was like, okay, so like when you're dreaming about something, like you dream about like marrying the perfect man and stuff, right? And I'm like, actually, no, marriage isn't really on my list of things to dream about. He's like, oh, okay, well, most women do. Okay, he talked a lot about biology, and like brain chemistry and neurology, which is great. But at the same time, he also talked about the difference in biology between males and females. And I noticed with this, along with a lot of other things, that I think he's making assumptions about where I stand with these issues. Because there was a point where he was like, oh yeah, because like he talks a lot about, he seems to talk a lot, like almost more than me, which is the first. Like it's not supposed to happen with a counselor, but still, like I might get some good stuff out of this guy, and it's free, and I could probably see him for as long as I want, which is like, you can't find that anywhere. Like nowadays, counseling sessions, you get like maybe 5 a year, if you're lucky. So I'm gonna keep going. But, the racist stuff too, that was the worst. He kept bringing up Islamic extremism and talking about, like, terrorists and virgins and all of this shit where it's like, you obviously are, like, stuck in a time where we didn't have the information about this stuff, and I actually called him out on it a couple times. I was actually like, I don't think you're being fair. I think you're generalizing a lot, and I think there are more Islamic people who are like us and who want to help people and to love others and blah 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 than there are the people who want to kill people. And he wasn't like, oh shit, he was like, yeah, like, these are generalizations, but that's what the point is, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, I don't agree with that, because like he was doing this thing where he was like, okay, my philosophy is to keep things simple, so the KIS method or whatever. I was like, yeah, I totally see with that, because when I came in, I was like, I want some solution focused stuff, because I already know all of the psychological orientations and methods and theoretical orientations, blah blah blah. I already know all this, so I really just want some way to fucking find some motivation. And by the end of the counseling session, he's like, okay, so I'm gonna have 4 philosophies, and you're gonna choose one. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, I'm a philosophy minor, and we talked a little bit about that, and so he goes into these 4 philosophies, and he lists them out. Secular humanism, dialectic materialism, Eastern mysticism, and ethic of love. And the way he went through them, he's like, you're going to choose one, and this is the one that's going to, like, be your life's purpose. This is going to, like, over-encompass why you're here, kind of thing. And as he goes through them, starting from the first, like, I automatically was like, he's actually representing such a biased description of these orientations. And like, I just kind of like, I went from, because like, okay, at the beginning of the session, it was super stimulating because he automatically started talking about philosophy, and I'm like, all right, this is what I'm into. Like, he asked me something like, why do humans always search for perfection? And I'm like, okay, this is totally in my alley, right? So I'm like totally in there, and I'm like facing forward, and I'm like, yeah. And then like I slowly start moving back as he's like saying these sexist and racist things, and I'm like, eventually I'm sitting in my chair, and I'm like, yeah, I'm looking off like this, and I'm like, yeah. And like, I was being respectful, but it's like, he's not getting the cues at all that I'm like, I'm not buying this at all. And so he brings up these 4 philosophies, and he's like, you're gonna choose one. And as he's describing them, you can see his facial expressions, and he's like, well, this one's like this, and blah blah blah, and the problem with this and these people. And then like when we talked about the Eastern thing, he like brought up like fucking the way he explained Eastern mysticism is, he's like, obtaining perfection, and you can't hang out with people from different classes and people who are like screwed up in their lives because it's gonna ruin your karma and all that. And I'm like, what? I literally said aloud, I was like, I actually studied Eastern religions and Eastern orientations to the human condition, and this isn't a good representation of what it is. And he just keeps going. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, right? So I'm just like, yeah, sitting like this, okay, yeah. And then he talks about the second one. He's like, dialectic materialism apparently equals to socialism and communism. And he's assuming that I'm totally against communism, as like, your average person would who doesn't know anything about it. Little does he know, I actually identify as a socialist. And so he's like representing it in the sense that like, you give all your money to the government, and you live in a small space, and you don't have any freedom, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, I've studied socialism, and that's not what it is. And you're not representing it right at all. And you're expecting me to choose out of these 4, and I'm guessing that the last one, like as he's explaining this, I'm guessing that the last one, in my head, I'm guessing that the last one, he's not going to give, oh, but these are all the problems. And truth be told, he gave it the last one, Ethic of Love, and he's like, that's the one from the Bible. And that's the one, like, he's like, were you raised in like, Sunday school and stuff? And I was like, yeah, I was. And he's like, well, that's the one you grew up, like, you be a good girl, and you go to heaven, and blah, blah, blah. And that's all he said about it. And I'm like, really? So you paint all these other ones in this evil light, and then you're like, oh, but this last one is this. And I'm like, oh, well, to be honest, I actually fall between all of them. And he's like, oh, but this is about keeping things simple. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm just not a simple person, and I can't just adhere to something, especially when you portray it like the way you have, like, it's so evil. Like, the first one, humanism, oh my god. He's like, humanism, he painted it as hedonism. Humanism is not the same as hedonism. He's like, yeah, you can do whatever you want, you can do these drugs, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's hedonism. That's not humanism. And so at the end, I was like, okay, look, I can't choose one of these. I'll tell you how I land in each one of them. I'll tell you how I think that you misrepresented in all of them. And I did, and he's like, well, tell me. And I was like, yeah. I was like, if you would have asked me what I thought in the first place, I would have told you. I said it like it was non-confrontational. There was no, there was no tension or anything with me saying that. I think hopefully he respected that to some extent. I think it took him aback as well, because he was like, oh, he brought up his notebook, and I'm like, well, if you would have asked me to begin with what my philosophy is, I could easily tell you, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And to the same extent, while he's explaining all these philosophical theories, I'm like, I've studied these. And he keeps going, and I'm like, you're not representing this right. I'm like, that's the first time I've heard dialectical material, or that's the first time I've heard secular humanism portrayed in that way. And I was like, that's interesting. He's like, yeah, it's, the point is to be a generalization and keep things specific. And I'm like, no. Like, if you're going to make a generalization, make it an accurate generalization. Don't just take a small section of the worst people in that theory and make it seem like the whole. So that kind of weirded me out. He did say some good stuff. He talked a lot about imperfection, and I think that really spoke to me because perfection is a huge problem in my life. And he's like, when you're searching for problems, like especially the stuff he brought up from the beginning when it comes to, he's like, so why do we search for perfection? And what I said was, well, I think a lot of it comes from society and the fact that like even just the whole branch of psychology, the whole science of psychology was created in order to control the masses and in order to define what is an ideal person, what is ideal psychological functioning. And the way I see it is that there is no ideal. And he did go into that a lot, where he's like, well, why are there like 150 different orientations? And he's like, because it's all relative. What is important is what works for the person. And he did stress that is what works for you. And so I know that I'm hoping that he's going to be respectful of my positions, even if he disagrees with them. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm deciding to go back, because I think that we'll probably have some pretty good intellectual conversations, if anything. And I almost feel as well that maybe he'll learn a little bit from me about, like social justice and being less oppressive of a counselor. At the end, he's like, actually, to be honest, at this point, like, I already like you. He's like, I've learned stuff from you, and it's been a stimulating conversation. And I was like, yeah, it was for me too. So we have another appointment next week. My homework is to look at those theories again, and I guess he wants me to elaborate, I guess, a little bit on where I stand and everything. So we'll see.